All right, so welcome everyone, and special thanks to our amazing guest, Madam Lisa Akornyi. And we are going to be talking a little bit about how to mend relationship between Africans and Africans in diaspora. And before we jump into the topic of today, I would like to take a minute to ask Madam Lisa to maybe give us a brief introduction about yourself. Tell us who is Lisa Akornyi?
Okay, interesting. I wear various hats. Let me just first off say that I was born and raised in Illinois within the United States. I am the proud mother of 5. I've spent my time traveling throughout the world, 16 years in Europe, 8 years of living in Africa, all throughout Asia, spent a few years living there. I've spent my time through education in the latter part of my life. I've done many things internationally. I've been a businesswoman, but my real passion has really been about, besides entertaining, growing up and things of that, like my passion has been about changing our people. And what do I mean by our people? People that are brown and black, people that look like me, and changing their situation, impacting their lives, making things better. I've been often accused of giving things too direct, setting the facts straight. I just want equality. I'm someone who is passionate about humanity, about helping others to advance. And lately, in the last 30 years of my life, I've been focused on the youth of people internationally, the youth of Black people worldwide, because they're the next generation. And that's who we have to look forward to taking care of us and changing the things that we've already instituted, making sure that the changes stick and stay. So that's just a little bit about who I am and what I do.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction of yourself. So, if you don't mind, let's do a deep dive. What do you do currently? I mean, I know there are a lot of African Americans who live in Ghana, but I haven't seen too many in Nigeria. There are some, I haven't seen too many. So why did you move to Nigeria?
Well, my primary reason for moving to Nigeria is that 25 years ago, I came to Nigeria on a business venture. I was invited by one of the richest men of Africa to come and do business. Aliko Dangote invited me, and I stayed in mostly Abuja and Lagos, visiting during the time of my business ventures. And I've really enjoyed Nigeria, but over the course of the years, Nigeria seemed to have gotten a very bad reputation, not just in America, but throughout the world. People were talking about Nigeria as if it was the worst place in the world to be, but I didn't seem to find that when I was there. So I have a school project. I'm co-founder of a school. Our headquarters are located in Houston, Texas. And we were doing some work, and we had to choose the place in Africa to best install our school. How can we help secondary school students who are interested in traveling all over the world and pursuing their education in bachelor's and master's level? And so, given that opportunity, I thought, who are the most educated Africans that I know? I said, Nigerians are. And everybody said, you can't go there. It's dangerous. There's no way. People don't want you there. You're going to have problems, all this negative thing. And so I believe that Black people all over the world have good and bad. And I was determined to show the rest of the world that these very bright, intelligent people in Nigeria deserve what we have to offer. They deserve affordable education. They deserve to have education where they don't have to, after secondary school, finish another year to year and a half before they get accepted into the first world nation universities. Nigeria is an English-speaking country. Why should they have to take the TOEFL exam if they want to go to university abroad? It makes no sense. Why should they have to pay international fees, triple, 3 times what other countries pay? So I chose Nigeria because I felt like Nigeria was deserving. And I said, come on, I'm from Illinois. How tough can it be? So I decided to jump in and just go for it. And so that's why I'm in Nigeria.
That's wonderful. And I know you live in Port Harcourt, at least the last time we spoke. And just so you know, I grew up about 30 minutes or maybe 1 hour now because of the bad roads from Port Harcourt,
yes,
in a place called Aba. And so it's really a pleasure to learn that you live in my backyard, you know. So that is great. I'm looking forward to actually connecting with you and meeting you one of these days in person when I come to visit Nigeria. So before we talk about Mending, what are some of the rift that you've noticed from your experience between Africans and other Africans in the diaspora?
When you say rift, you mean my personal experiences?
Yes, you could use your personal experiences or maybe some other things others have shared with you, things you've read, you've observed. What are some of the problems amongst us, brothers, sisters?
Well, let me just start out by saying, even though you see me in Nigeria, I've been all over Africa. I've spent time from the east, as far east as Tanzania, Rwanda. I've been not only Nigeria as the western part of Africa, but lived over 8 years in Senegal, Cameroon, Togo, Burkina Faso, Mali. I mean, I've done Angola, Central Africa. I've been all the way down to South Africa. So, I mean, whether it's Equatorial Guinea or whether it's Morocco, for me, I think that when I give my experience in answering your question, you can understand that I'm not just speaking from one country perspective, but from many countries in the continent as an African American. Again, I use the term African American, and it's kind of difficult to say it right now with all that's going on in the social media and how we're fighting amongst each other with African Americans and Africans, and let's not talk about the people in the Caribbean. We always leave them out, and they had to pass the Caribbean with the slaves to get to America. So they just dropped a few off in the Caribbean and started a whole nother country down there in the Antilles. But the experience, and I've lived there also, so my experience has been that, I'll share this story with you. I came back to Africa for the first time in my life in the mid-1980s, okay? I was working as an international flight attendant for the very first international airline, Pan Am. Okay, I'm telling my age now because that was the mid-80s. And so I stepped in Africa. I remember that flight. I was flying from New York JFK to Senegal. They had a direct flight back then. And I did what most African Americans would do, what they dreamed about when they stepped their foot on the continent for the first time. I walked down the staircase of the stairway and my feet touched the ground, and I'm even shaking now, getting chills, because even though it was in the mid-'80s, I can still feel it. As soon as my feet touched the ground, I did what every prominent African American would do. I kneeled down and I literally kissed the ground. I literally kissed the ground because I felt like, wow, I'm finally at home. I've made it. So, as I left the airport and we were driving to our hotel, I was amazed by the beauty of the things that I saw from the airport to the hotel. I did not see one person, one child that was starving. I didn't see any kids with flies on their mouths. I didn't see anything that the media had shown me all of my life. I saw huge houses, 2-3-story homes. I saw lanes. Actual streets that had 4 or 5 lanes. So I was at awe, because it wasn't the Africa that I had in my mind, nor what most Americans, Black and white, have in their minds. It wasn't what I'd seen on television. Everybody was dressed nicely. I didn't see people running around that didn't have clothes on with tribal marks. It was being like the Western world. I didn't see a big difference. Yeah, there was no zoning and housing where businesses were, but still it was very beautiful. And as I got to the hotel, we decided that we would go out to a restaurant and we eat. I was so amazed because at the restaurant, when I arrived, there was Black people everywhere. I'm from Illinois, and in Chicago, it's like one of the largest African American population throughout the United States. So I was used to seeing Black people, but not everywhere I went. Banks, people who were running banks, owning banks, they were Black. The president of the country was Black. I'm sitting in a restaurant and a white person walks in and everybody in the restaurant literally turns around and looks at the white person like, what are you doing here? So for me, that's what I was used to experiencing as a Black person in America, walking into stores or into places and white people making me feel like I really didn't belong. So, my encounter, I felt like I was at home. But then later on, we decided to leave the restaurant and we said, let's go shopping. So, that was my big introduction to negotiations, because in America, if tomatoes cost $5, you get $5. You don't stand at the market and try to negotiate and talk it down to $3 or $2. So for me, I saw the guy, he walked up to me, he said, hey, my good sister, I have a good price. Do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy that? So I was told I needed to negotiate him. And when he started giving me these very high prices, I said to him, why are you pricing me so high? I'm your sister. I'm coming back home for the first time. Don't treat me like a white person. And he literally looked at me and he laughed. And he said, treat you like a white woman, you are a white woman. And I said, wow, I couldn't believe that. I said, what do you mean I'm a white woman? I'm Black like you. He said, no, you're a white woman. I don't know how many people on the call are from Senegal or Guinea, but he called me Tuba. And then Wolof, that was the second word I learned, which meant white person. I said, Tuba. And I stood there frozen. I was literally frozen. I was shocked that a man, a Black man, an African, would call me a white woman. So I suddenly realized that, white meant to Africans that your skin is not as Black as mine. But I need to tell everyone on this call that African Americans believe that Black is deeper than just your skin. It's like a heritage. Black means a spiritual being with a real soul. You know, we're the original people. So we have human dignity and love for one another. And that had not been my experience with white people. So when someone called me directly, a white woman, that was my experience in the mid-'80s when I got here. I will tell you that I arrived in Potako in November of 2018. And people here in Nigeria still was calling me the white woman. So for years, I've been having to explain to people the differences between the whole Black and white and the misconceptions, and how dare I call myself an African American? Well, probably because I'm a descendant of an African who happened to be born in America. And I believe, just as many African Americans believe, that gives us the right to be called African Americans. I mean, we're descendants of the soil. And so that was kind of my story of my.
Thanks for sharing that story. Hearing about where you have been in Africa, it seems like we should come up with some kind of a prize or a pageant, so to speak, and crown you Queen of Africa. Because from what I'm hearing, you sound like you are more African than many Africans are here. I mean, in fact, I don't think I've been to that many African countries myself. So big kudos to you, and thanks for taking time to visit our wonderful continent. So back to your story. Why do you think there is that misconception? Why do you think Africans or some Africans will call an African American white, or not see them as being part of the African heritage? Why is that, in your opinion?
Well, I think that there's a lot of misconception, and I'll explain to you. You see, growing up, we're taught that Africans don't like us because we're not pure. We're mixed with other things, and they don't like us because we're not pure. And as I've toured throughout Africa, I find that many Africans say to me, Black Americans don't like us because we are responsible for sending them off into slavery. And so I think that's the beginning of the misconception. But this thing goes a lot deeper than what you could imagine. I'll give you another example. You see, in early on years, I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought because this thing is quite emotional for me. But I will say that Africans, we're seeing on television, when we see Africans, the media portrays poverty, the media portrays no education. How many Black Americans know that there is a Lekki in Lagos? I mean, we don't see skyscraper buildings. We see, whether it's churches asking us for money on television, they tell us $5 will feed a child for the entire year. $3 will educate a child for the entire year. They show us poverty. When we see non-profit organizations like UNICEF, USAID, they show starvation, they show villages. They don't show us Côte d'Ivoire, downtown. We just can't imagine Rwanda having skyscraping buildings when we think about genocide. So there's a misconception about what Africa is to African Americans, just like Africans have a misconception. They show on television, when you see Black Americans, you see Black on Black crime. You see gun violence. You see people who are not educated. I went to university. I have a master's degree. I'm educated. A lot of so many people are. So I think that to answer your question, the view is more how we view one another is because of CNN, the media, social media. I mean, even right now, we see music videos from Nigeria, and all African Americans believe those videos are shot in America. They can't believe that they're shot in Nigeria. So I think that's the reason for the misconception, is because we have this thing that has been put and portrayed in our mind, and we don't have the facts. We don't know our heritage.
So before this session, I had reached out to a few people to get some questions. So I'm going to ask a question that caught my attention. And by the way, as Madam Lisa is speaking, if you have questions, go ahead and post them on the chat room, and I can go ahead and ask her. So the question here is: the Jews all over the world invest in Israel. The current state of Israel is a testimony of the Jews giving back to their roots. Why is the case of Africa different?
Wow. Well, number one, we're divided. We're divided. I believe even amongst Black people in the diaspora, we haven't connected or with one another. For example, you see, the closest point to the United States in Africa is Senegal. Senegal is a French-speaking country. In high school or secondary school, we are required to learn a second language in America. Do you know what language they insist that Black people learn? They insist we learn Spanish. White people will learn French. So that, look how this thing goes. If there's ever a chance for Africans from the closest point of Africa to now come to America, what would be the barrier for Black people uniting? The language. And so when I see people who come from Francophone countries in Africa, in America, they are with white people. Why is that? Because white people generally speak their language. But to me, I say, oh, this is proof that Africans don't like us. They're always with the white people and they don't connect with the Black people. We don't know and realize that language is one of the main barriers. And so we're not united. We're still divided, even though we're on the same continent. So how can we now work together? How can we? It's almost impossible. You see, because of the divide that slavery has given, I mean, the colonization has not yet been removed from our minds of the people. It's still there. And so oftentimes Africans refuse to recognize and appreciate the potentials that we don't understand each other, that underneath that there's a sense of safety, that we have to still come together and connect with one another.
I just wanted to add something to what Lisa said. Lisa, thank you so much for this nuggets that you're sharing. So I wanted to just really piggyback on what you said to respond to the question about why are like the Jews in diaspora supporting their communities back home, and it's not the same in this situation. So as you were saying, it has to do with the fact that we're divided. So we have to understand that at some point in history, all the African people were in Africa. We were one. We were all together. And when the transatlantic slave trade happened, we were divided. And it wasn't just a physical division, it was emotional, it was by language, it was psychologically, we were divided. And when when a part of us was sent across to shores to the new world, they were told different stories. You know, your people sold you for trinkets and for mirrors. They don't care about you. They sold you off, and they were traumatized really heavily. And those of us that were back home in Africa, that were left behind, we were also traumatized by colonialism. We were told that we were inferior. We were treated awfully by the colonizers. And the fact is that for this trauma we experienced, the people that were in diaspora experienced it. Those of us in Africa experienced it. We've never come together to revisit it and to talk about it and to unpack it. We all have the residual effects of this trauma going on. And when we meet each other, even today, the people that were taken away to the diaspora and those of us in Africa, there's this deep seed of mistrust that was planted that is still there, because they look at us Africans and they've been told for generations, these people don't care about you. They sold you off for nothing. And we have been told our own stories. You know, we go to America sometimes and we try to interact with them, and because of the stories they've been told, they don't trust us. And then the colonizers or the white people, you know, excuse my language, who are invested in really reinforcing this division, they say to us, don't worry about them. They are the bad Black people. You are the good ones. You come from Africa, you're educated, we'll give you these opportunities. Don't hang around with them. They're always angry. They don't, you know, they don't want to work hard. That's why they've been kept behind for so many years. And this division and this mistrust is compounded and it grows. So at this point, we're not even at the stage where we can talk about supporting each other. We need to go back to the beginning and try to unpack this trauma and these divisional seeds that were planted many, many years ago and fix it. Until we go back to the root and fix it, there's no collaboration. There's not going to be a lot of collaboration or progress or togetherness, because we need to go back to where things went wrong and fix it there, first of all. So that's just what I wanted to say. Sorry if I went all around the block.
That's okay. Thank you very much. No, that was a good contribution. Madam Lisa, do you want to say something to that? We have more questions pouring in.
I agree. I just want to say thank you so much for backing me and supporting me. And this is where it starts. This is how it starts, with the dialogue. This is how the healing and the mending starts. And so I really appreciate you for that. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Somebody says here, there are lots of influential and educated African Americans in America with PhDs in education. Why hasn't this notion of Africans don't like us been debunked? And just a statement. You don't have to respond to it, but it just sort of reinforcing the fact that the division has gone on for too long, and people are not really working to debunk this. But here's a question for you, Madam Lisa, which also ties to, is a question I have on here on my hand, which is also asked somewhat on the chat room. Let's see, on the chat room we have, someone is asking, we Africans, or he's saying, we Africans have also been educated to hate our Blackness through our own books. Everything good and invented, or even God is white. That is what somebody, Jacob Obinya, said in the chat room. It ties into what I'm about to ask here, which is, I have seen Africans trying to be more Eurocentric than Europeans themselves. What's the cause of this malady?
Well, there's been many, for me, I know there's been many studies. Even if you do it today, if you take the baby dolls, for example, one Black baby doll and a white baby doll, and if you give it to a child now here in Africa, and you say, choose the baby doll that's beautiful, they will pick the white baby doll. It's still there. There's remnants still there. Even when subliminal messages, when you watch television, for example, when you watch movies that are written by African Americans, or you see mostly the actors and actresses are African Americans, those movies are there depicting violence, depicting rape, depicting everything that's brutal. But when you see those same people who are writing movies for white people, They have white people depicting characters as if they're saving the world. They're always either saving animals, Superman, Batman, you know, they're saving animals, or they're saving Africans who are starving. I mean, it's those messages that carry on. It's the thing that when I see a young girl here in Patako and I say to her, wow, her skin is very black. I say, wow, your skin is so beautiful. And she looks and says, why would you say that? I'm trying to make my skin lighter. And I said, why? Because they say the lighter you are, the more beautiful you are. So this thing, we have to start changing. For me, I'm a mother of 5. I have a daughter that is the same complexion as me, and I have a daughter that's about 4 times darker than me. When they were growing up as children, my kids played with dolls that look like them. People would give them baby dolls that were white. I give them right back. Because I knew that this message was saying, you're playing with your doll, you think your doll is beautiful. It was creating an image. So that doll had to look like my daughter.
That's great. So here's a question for you. Of the 10 to 12 million enslaved people taken from Africa, 600,000 went to the US South. About 4.9 million went to Brazil. Why is Brazil so disconnected when they possess the most Africans outside of Africa?
That's a very interesting question. I've been to Brazil, and I think over the generation and generation, they just don't identify with Blacks in Brazil. They, as their heritage. Again, I believe that they haven't been told the truth. They don't recognize the truth. In the history books that I grew up, it said that Christopher Columbus discovered America. It doesn't say that when Christopher Columbus came to America, there were Africans already in America. So we don't know the truth. It's time through your university, we have an opportunity through Osiris University to start telling the truth. Whether they're from Brazil or whether they're from Jamaica or Barbados or America or Germany, we need to get the truth out there. We need to unite. Do you realize that even though we know, if you ask an African American to name the 7 continents, they will name Africa as a continent. But when we see Africa, the maps are always so small that we envision in our mind that Africa is a country instead of a continent. And this is done on purpose. Why? Because if we realize that somewhere like Nigeria, the population of Nigeria and the population of America, if we realize that that's just one country in Africa, and you have 50-something other countries, we would now, as African Americans, start to know that, wow, Black people are the majority. Look at Brazil. If we had an idea of all the Black diaspora, then we would be able, look, divide us, conquer us. We would be able to unite and stand and start mending, building businesses. But as so now, we can't.
I have to agree with you about Brazil, but let me also quickly chip in that I've been to Salvador in Brazil, and there, some of the Africans over there are very Africans. In fact, they are still practicing some African religion there. And one thing that we did actually just this past week was to make sure that we change our flyer to include a time in Brazil, because we have time in Europe, we have Africa, we have the US, we have Latin America, like Jamaica. So we also wanted to include Brazil as well, and we just did that. And I think another issue with the Brazil being so disconnected, even though there are over 90 million Africans there, is because they speak Portuguese, right? So a lot of Africans tend to speak either English or Spanish. There's only a few African countries that speak Portuguese. So I think that's just my hypothesis. That may also play into the fact that they are a little bit more disconnected from the continent. But thank you so much for your comment on that. Another question here for you is, given the progress for a country like Rwanda, why is it hard for we Africans and African countries to learn from others?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I missed the first part of the question.
Yes, is given the progress that we see in Rwanda, why can other African countries learn from Rwanda?
Well, in my opinion, it's not that we can't learn from there. It has to do with leadership. A lot of leadership that's going on in Rwanda is young, fresh leadership. And I think that with everything that Rwanda has been through, they have been given an opportunity to try this thing over. And through the pain, what has come out of the pain has been the progress for them. And luckily, they have had great leadership.
And I saw the other day on a video where Paul Kagame's hosted an event for some African leaders where they are talking about past and present. They're talking about the way forward. And I feel like there's change happening. It's slowly coming, but I feel like it's happening. And I really hope that it moves quicker than the pace that we are experiencing. Somebody just made a comment in the platform that Rwanda's leadership is also majority female. The lower house is over 60% female, and that could also play into that. Okay, I want to welcome Jacob Obinian. You have your hand raised. You want to go ahead and say something, or you want to ask a question? You have the floor.
No, I just wanted to add to the conversation of Brazil, and then a little bit about the conversation at large. First of all, Brazil's demographic is very challenging. We also have to mix in the natives in there, yeah? And they have been having identity crisis within the Brazilian system in terms of even identifying race. So they have a larger problem of identity in Brazil. You can go to a place where you see majority Black people and actually majority Nigerians, yes, in some towns, small towns, if you go in the hinterland, yeah? So Brazil is much more a complex mix. Now, one of the things I see with our African issue is we have to reclaim our identity, our names. I mean, we have like the Victoria Falls, for example. Even my country, Nigeria, isn't mine. The name itself isn't mine. So I think we need to actually start reclaiming those. I mean, the Europeans didn't discover America. They had people there already. Yes, they didn't discover Alaska either. Yes, I think this narrative, especially how we are educated in our books, give us this false narrative that the white man is God.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
That is why you see even the bleaching industry, skin toning industry worldwide is still booming.
Thank you for that wonderful contribution. Someone is asking, is there a way to create a platform for discourse and dismantling seeds of discord between Africans on the continent and those in the diaspora? It seems like this is something that we really need to do. Would you like to respond to that? I mean, is there a need for us to keep having this conversation, and how can we go about it? Because it has to be both ways, right? How do we bring them on board? And, or how do we go to them as well? So
I'm chairman of an organization, a nonprofit organization called Refocus Africa. And that's actually one of the things that Refocus Africa is trying to do. We have that platform. We give the CEO of the company, he presents different things out on Facebook, on our website. We're trying to reach people from that regards, because Refocus Africa is basically, we want to look at the business aspect, not just the education aspect. We have different levels, but we want to start to create businesses, bring businesses from the Western world, from everywhere into Africa to help develop. And we want to do this through working with other Blacks in the diaspora. For example, we have a collaboration with about 10,000 nonprofit organizations in America, and all those organizations are minority organizations, majority Black-owned organizations that are looking for ways to come to Africa to bring what they have there and help to rebuild. I mean, Africa has the resources, they have the minerals, you have everything. Now, if we could just bring the critical thinking from what we have learned in America and in those Western worlds, and we now join forces and unite, then the development starts there for business, for education, and all of those areas.
Wonderful. Someone says here, it's an interesting topic. I was working towards starting a podcast regarding this topic. It really aches me, especially for the fact that I have been in Kansas for about 6 years, and I am beginning to learn about African Americans just moving to Houston in the last month. If there is going to be a continuation in mending this relationship, I will be interested in being part of it. So I'm glad to read and to see that a lot of Africans on this platform really wants to mend this relationship. They are saying, bring it on, let's fix it, let's welcome each other again. Now, somebody else saying here, I know we all have a lot of relearning to do as regards to the relationship between Africans and African Americans and in dismantling the discord. Just wondering if we all as Africans can stop referring to Black Americans as Akata. And that's something I'd like to ask you. Have you come across that term in Nigeria, Akata? And how do you feel about it if you have come across that term? What does it mean to you? What is meant by it? And please respond to that comment. Thank you.
No, I haven't come across that term. I'm not familiar with it.
Well, that's interesting.
But please share.
Go ahead.
I think people tend to be polite when they see me. I don't know. Maybe it's maybe it's my fragile look or something. But I think as far as they've gone is just white people. I know that there's a lot going on social media now with the hatred that's developing. And I want to just really apologize for my African American sisters and brothers and saying that if we make comments or people make comments like, you guys, you drive cars, you know how to drive, or we didn't know that, you had toothbrushes and all this. Know that the average African American would never be able to afford, or it's difficult. I shouldn't say would never, but it's very difficult to imagine having to be able to actually come to Africa and see what it's like when you're living paycheck to paycheck. So we only go by what we see on the news. So if we're insulting, please forgive us. I think that we just need to be more tolerant of one another in order to start this mending with each other's values, and know that it's been a lot of false information out there. But
and
please share.
No, it goes both ways. I mean, you are talking about apologizing on behalf of African Americans, but according to the person who just posted the comment, some Africans, I think mostly Nigerians, will call some now, and I think it is dying too, because I haven't heard it in a long time. They will call African Americans Akata, and I'm not really sure what it means. I don't know where it came from. But it's meant to exclude, right? It's basically when you give someone a name, you are referring to that person as the other person. So it goes both ways. I think there needs to be a change of heart and a change of language on both sides. And somebody just commented that it means wild cat on the chat room. Wild cat. And so we have about 10 minutes on the clock here. Let me ask this one question here, and then I'll ask for your final thoughts. A lot of African American communities seem to be dysfunctional with violence, drugs, single parenthood. Why is that? That is a question on the platform.
Well, I would just say this. Mainly, if you have been following what's been going on in the news with the George Floyd situation, maybe it can open your eyes to see how disproportionate life has been for African Americans since the beginning of time. We got our rights to vote in the 60s, but it didn't change anything. They let us go into classrooms with and be educated in the same schools, but it didn't change anything. You can see we're in 2020, and the disproportion of jobs, we're paid less, opportunities to go to school, opportunities to access things that white America can access. For example, if I can't get a loan to pay for my house or to pay for my education, then I'm usually left going to a lower part of education. If I'm driving down the street in what we call driving while black, and a police officer has to meet his quota of arrest, then guess what? I'm the one that's arrested. A black person can do the same crime as a white person in America. The black person may get 20 years, the white person may get 6 months in probation. The prisons are built for us. The system is built to keep us down. So I think that if you just do a little research on Black Americans versus white Americans when it comes to the opportunities and just the normal day-to-day living, you will see that it's so disproportionate that the end result is exactly what you see.
And to support that, I recently watched a video, and some of us on this platform may have also watched that video because I shared it with them, about Booker T. Washington, the great Booker T. Washington, sharing his experience as someone, as a child of an enslaved African. Grew up basically in a shack next to the house. They played the shack where he grew up with his mother and his siblings. They didn't have any window, didn't have any door. They slept on the floor. And growing up in that condition, he didn't know his father because essentially a European American came to have his way with the mom and had him. And that was the case for his other siblings. So it's important for us to understand that we are still living in history. The present is a continuation of history. It's important we understand that. Yes, the slaves may have been emancipated, as they like to say it, but the repercussion of that is still felt today. There's huge ripple effects. And so when you have millions of people born out of rape in this country we call America, and most of them being Africans or African heritage, you can imagine that could have some effects today. And Africans in this country continue to be disenfranchised. There was a time the U.S. government had a housing program, and then the U.S. government made sure that Africans didn't benefit. I'm talking about African Americans now, did not benefit from that housing program. So European Americans were able to get loans to buy homes, and they built equity from their homes, they built wealth, but that didn't happen for African Americans. So we need to all keep that in mind. There's historic injustice. There's been no reparation given to African Americans. So we should keep that in mind when we see some of these effects that we feel today. That it does have some deep and systemic historical context. last question for you, Madam Lisa. What can we do concretely? We have about 5 minutes on the clock here. What advice can you give folks on this platform as we leave here? What can we do? What action can we take to do our own part in mending this relationship that we are talking about here?
You know, I think what we really can do at this point is very simple. Let's be knowledge driven. Let's be knowledge driven. We have often been told that we must wait for the answer to be forthcoming, for us to be on top. The truth is, we are the answer. Ourselves, we're the answer, because royalty and strength runs deep within our veins. We have but to access the richness that our ancestors have set before us. That's the secret. We hold the secret. It has been remained hidden, and we can unlock that through knowledge. Just be knowledge driven. We need to be more understanding of each other's culture. Know your history. Know your history. Teach the history to our children. This university that you're starting is the perfect platform. Someone asked, where do we get a platform? We have the ability. Each one, teach one. And that's what we're doing, starting this university.
Thank you so much, Madam Lisa. And we are so excited and privileged to have you as one of the Osiri University's Council of Elders. The university has, in the African tradition, a group of men and women that advise the progress of this university. And we are very privileged to have you advising us and shaping the future of this university. We know that you love Africa, and you come to us with a global mindset, because you've traveled not just in Africa, but all over the world. And your background is also very global, and you bring that to enrich our university. You also mentioned a little bit about beauty, you know, how you advise young girls in Nigeria to love themselves. I'm very happy to also announce on the platform here that Malance, some of you may know Malance, Bat Williams. She's also a member of our Council of Elders. She'll be coming August 15th to talk about beauty in particular. So she's going to zero in on the art of beauty in the African context. And we're going to do justice to that topic. So I'm glad that you've been able to lay some groundwork and some foundation on that. And thank you again for the recommendation, which is, let's be knowledge driven. We are the answer. So if you leave here, what Madam Lisa is telling us today is, if you leave here, go and pick up a book and read, please. Go and watch maybe some history about Africa or about African Americans. Look at some of the rich history about great African Americans who traveled to Africa to help the African liberation, and vice versa, right? So read about those things. We have been working together for a while in some instances, but we need to uncover those stories and teach those stories to ourselves. So we are the answer, and let's continue to be knowledge driven. Thank you, Madam Lisa, for coming. Thank you all for tuning in, and that's our time for today. And I'll see you next week. We have another Council of Elder member who is going to come in next week. You'll be receiving information about that. So tune in again next week, 1 hour. We'll talk a little bit more about how to advance our continent. Thank you, everyone.